Hey YouTube, Kira Twig here, bringing you all my Crystron Yugioh deck profile for post Dual Overload. Wanted to do a deck profile on the Crystron archetype, being the big hype of the latest Dual Overload set, focusing on the new Link monster that we finally got in the TCG, Crystron Needle Fiber or Crystron Hackliff Fibrix, depending on whichever name you prefer to use for it. This is actually the deck that the card was originally intended to be used in, but being such a broken card, was used in basically every other deck that could use, a tuner and a synchro aside from the Crystron deck. But I want to do a deck profile focusing on the actual purpose of Hackliff Fibrix or Needle Fiber, which I'll go by the latter for this deck profile when I discuss the card, with all the different playstyles you can do with the Crystron deck, which the main focus is to destroy your different cards on the field, to special summon out tuners and non-tuner Crystron monsters from either the graveyard, the deck, or ones that are banished. It's a really fun deck, so let's go ahead, enough talk, and get started with the deck profile. So to start off, for the non-tuner monsters, I am running 3 Crystron Thystvern, I believe is how you pronounce the name. With it, you can target 1 face-up card you control. You cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn, except machine-type synchro monsters. Also destroy that card. If you do special summon 1 Crystron Tuner from your deck, you can banish this card from your graveyard to add 1 Crystron monster from your deck to your hand, except Crystron Thystvern. I'm getting or Wyvern, I believe. Thystvern. It's a real tongue twister, that's for sure. But you can only use 1 Crystron Thystvern effect per turn, and only once that turn. So you have either your setup for your synchro play using this card, or the overall search you can use by banishing this card to search for another Crystron monster you have in your deck and adding it to your hand for you to use. So you have definite options when using this card, and the fact that with your tuners in the deck for the Crystron monsters, you can then synchro summon on your opponent's turn. So for the rest of this turn, being limited to the machine synchros isn't really limiting you at all, since a good amount of the synchro monsters in the extra deck are the Crystron synchros, and then the other generic ones you can summon out during your opponent's turn also. For one of the better non-tuner Crystron monsters, I'm also running 3 Crystron Sulfifner, I believe is how you pronounce this one. This is definitely going to be an interesting deck profile with the names. I believe they're going off of the different type of crystals and, play on words for their names. But with this one, if this card is in your hand or graveyard, you can discard 1 Crystron card except for Sulfifner and special summon this card in defense position, then destroy 1 card you control. If this card on the field is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon 1 Crystron monster from your deck in defense position. You can only use each of the effects of Crystron Sulfifner once per turn. So it doesn't have a graveyard effect, but it has great setup for your other Crystrons that do have graveyard effects, so then you can easily banish them from the graveyard, being able to only use 1 of their effects per turn. So then you can set up your field with an easy special summon with this card, setting up other Crystrons for the banish effect in the graveyard to search out other cards, and then go for that with your tuner searches, also using this card, which then you can normal summon out onto the field and then go for your synchro plays. And I also run 2 Crystron Smyger, I believe. That's how you pronounce it, like a play on words with tiger. But you can target 1 face-up card you control. You cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn, except machine-type synchro monsters. Also destroy that card. If you do special summon 1 Crystron Tuner from your deck, you can banish this card from your graveyard to add 1 Crystron spell or trap from your deck to your hand, and you can only use 1 effect of Crystron Smyger once per turn. So the trap is the big play. We have 2 traps in the deck we run that definitely are helpful for all of your different Crystron plays. So being able to search them out with this card is definitely useful. I only run the 2 though. It's not as needed, I would say, as the monster search you get with Thystvern, and then just the overall special summon plays you get with Sulfifner. So having 2 of this for the search just gives me an additional non-tuner as well to run in the deck for all the other tuners that we have in the deck for our plays. And I also run 2 Crystron Roseniks. With this one, you can target 1 face-up card you control. You cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn, except machine-type synchros. Also, once again, the same destruction effect. To special summon 1 Crystron Tuner from your deck, you can banish this card from your graveyard to special summon 1 Crystron Token Machine. Level 1, attack and defense both 0, but it cannot be attributed, and you can only use 1 Crystron Roseniks effect per turn, and only once that turn. But the fact that it gives you an additional monster is definitely useful for your your go-to link plays, since with your Crystron Halqifibrax, you only need 2 monsters, including a tuner, so being able to use that token as one of those additional monsters later on after, let's say, you use the Rosenix for a synchro play, which now in Master Rule is a lot more useful, because then you can place your synchro monsters in the main monster zones and then save the extra monster zone for your link monsters that you'll definitely still want to go into with this deck. So 2 of this one as well. The token situation is nice, but it doesn't help you enough if you don't have your other cards ready to go up for the setup, including the tuner monster you may need. But speaking of the tuners, we'll go ahead and move on to those. Probably the best one in the deck is Crystron Tsundere. I'm running 3 of this card. The level 2 tuner, during your opponent's main phase or battle phase, you can target 1 non-tuner monster in your graveyard. Special summon it, but it has its effects negated. And if you do, immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon 1 machine-type synchro monster using only that monster in this card. It is a quick effect. Then the synchro materials are either banished instead of being sent to the graveyard. You can only use this effect of Tsundere once per turn. So if you have your setup with your Crystron Tsundere, being able to special summon a Crystron from your graveyard to the field and then go for the synchro play is your go-to play, which being able to summon out your Crystron Amatrex on your opponent's turn and disrupt their special summon plays by switching the battle positions of all their monsters, especially useful when going up against decks that aren't link monster reliant, since the link monsters will definitely, put a damper in your plan, since you won't be able to change the battle positions of those cards. But remember that also, but still very, very useful just having that easy synchro setup for any of the other synchros we run the deck, which we'll go over when we get to the extra deck. But for the other ones, they're more situational depending on the special summon. So I wanted to run the most with Tsundere, since graveyard setup is very, very easy in this deck. I'm only running 2 Crystron Ryan. During your opponent's main phase or battle phase, you can target 1 of your banished non-tuner monsters and special summon it, but it has its effects negated. And if you do immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon 1 machine-type synchro monster, only using those monsters for your plays. So with that, having the machine monster synchro option still very, very useful for the plays to go for, but once again, it helps more for your setup with your Crystron Tsundere already being in use, because then you'll have the setup for your banished cards after sending the synchro play with your Crystron Tsundere and being able to have those actual banished targets for your Crystron Ryan to make use of for its own level play. And the fact that this card is also a level 3 makes it more adjustable with some of the other non-tuner Crystron monsters, depending on the level you want to go for also for your synchro plays. And lastly, I'm also running 1 Crystron Quan during your opponent's main phase or battle phase, having the same special summon effect from your hand this time, but it has its effects negated. So more situational, it comes in handy, but if it was just a special summon effect during your turn as well, being able then to rely on the link play as well as the synchro play, depending on what you want to go for. But the fact that you still have to synchro summon with the card and it's during your opponent's turn, still more situational depending on the type of card you may want to go for with this card. That's why I'm only running 1 of this. Not as searchable, and you don't want to eat up your hand resources either. And then for the non-Crystron monsters I'm running in the deck, I'm running 3 Quick Draw Synchron. Now this could be Scrap Recycler or even Gen X Undyne, and then the additional engine for that lineup. It all depends on what you have to play for this deck. If you don't have Scrap Recyclers or Gen X Undyne, you can put in, the Quick Draw Synchrons as your first go-to option, and then swap them out for Scrap Recyclers if you have them, or the Gen X Undyne engine, depending on what you want to run in the deck. But with Quick Draw Synchron, you don't really use it much for the synchro summon of any of these synchron monsters. It's more for the easy graveyard setup you can do with your Quick Draw Synchron if you have another monster in your hand, just being able to special summon this card from your hand by sending 1 monster from your hand to the graveyard, setting up the Crystrons in your graveyard for even more searches, and giving you the special summon of a tuner on the field, which then you'll be able to use for the link play of your Crystron Halqifibrax, needing 2 or more monsters, like I said, including a tuner, which Quick Draw Synchron definitely helps to fill in that spot, and also giving you a face-up card if need be for you to destroy with your other Crystron monsters to get those special summons also. So very, very useful, just not for the, intentional results of this tuner. It's more used just for your other resources in the deck, but still very, very useful. And then also to finish up the monsters, I run the 3 Ash Blossom, just my go-to hand trap in the deck of choice for just being able to stop my opponent's searches, along with having my Synchro Alliance on their turn as well, going into different Synchro monsters. And that is it for the monsters. Moving on to the spells, I run 2 Starlight Junction. You can tribute 1 tuner monster to special summon 1 synchron monster from your deck with a different level than the tributed monster had on the field. And during your opponent's turn, if you special summon a synchro monster from your extra deck, target 1 card on the field, shuffle into the deck, and you can only use each effect of Starlight Junction once per turn. So basically, like, this card was made for the Crystron deck, since you synchro summon a lot on your opponent's turn, and being able to search out the quick draw synchron as well by getting rid of some of your other tuners that, let's say, the good for the effects on your opponent's turn, but if you're going off of your turn and you want more resources to make use of, they might be better off just in the graveyard for you to summon out later on as well. Plus, I run the 1 Terraformer. I only run the 2 Starlight Junctions just because it doesn't have any search power. Once you have it set up, having multiples of it in your hand really won't do you any good. You want to have those monsters to go into. And one of the, I would say it's not a new card, but one I'm definitely liking and testing out on the deck is Smoke Grenade of the Thief. This one is a big help in the deck just for the fact that it can discard a card from your opponent's hand and also be set up for your play for your Crystron monsters. When this equip spell is active and destroyed by a card effect, look at your opponent's hand, select 1 card from their hand, and discard to the graveyard. Being able to use this turn 1 by setting up your Crystron monsters and then destroy it, and then also discard cards from your opponent's hand. I'm wondering if this card will be around that much longer for the fact that it can easily dwindle your opponent's hand on turn 1. And if that happens, I'll probably have to do an update to this deck. But until then, it's still a very, very strong card in the deck. And I'll show the combo you can go for with this card in the deck for what you can do turn 1 against your opponent and make them dwindle down their hand. And also, the Crystron monsters are all water, so to help with some of the consistency, I'm also running 2 Moray of Greed. Just being able to shuffle 2 water monsters back into the deck to draw 3 cards makes up for some dead hand draws you may have, because you definitely want to open up with some of the better Crystron monsters, so then you can go for your setup with your tuners later on also. And for the 1-ofs, I am running 1 Foolish Burial and 1 Monster Reborn. Just, resource setup with the Foolish Burial and then being able to get resources back to use with Monster Reborn. Very, very useful for sure. And for the spells, along with the Ash Blossom, just 3 Call by the Grave. Great way to stop your opponent's monsters, especially when you want to go for your synchro plays. And if they stop your special summons with cards like Effect Veiler as well, it could be a big problem also. And then that's it for the spells. Moving on to the traps, I am running 3 Crystron Impact with this one. Target 1 of your banished Crystron monsters, special summon it, and if you do, your opponent controls any face-up monsters, change their defense to 0. And during either player's turn, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, when a card or effect is activated that targets a Crystron monster, you can banish this card from your graveyard and negate the effect. It doesn't, destroy the card, but being able to negate it, it's still very, very useful, especially when you're going up against, anything that would destroy your Crystron monsters if your opponent tries to activate that card. And then being able to set their defense to 0 after you change their battle position with cards like Crystron Amatrix is a big help also, just to easily attack over them. And I also play 2 Crystron Entry. You special summon 2 Crystron's tuners, 1 from your hand and 1 from your graveyard during either player's turn, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard. You can banish it from your graveyard to target 1 Crystron monster you control, to send 1 Crystron monster from your deck to the graveyard, whose level is different from that monster, and if you do, that monster becomes the level of that monster. The adjustment of the levels, especially with all the different leveled Crystron monsters we're running, is a big help for sure if you need to go for a specific synchro play, but not as good as Impact. Impact just definitely does come in handy for the protection and the overall special summon power and the defense reduction of your opponent. So just 2 of the Entry and 3 of the Impact in the deck. And that is it for the main deck. We'll now move on to the extra deck. For the synchros, I have 2 Crystron Quandex. This one, being a synchro tuner especially, is useful just for the different plays we can go for in the deck as well. And being able to special summon it out with Crystron Halqifibrax is another added bonus for sure. And with it, once per turn chain during your opponent's main or battle phase, you can quick effect immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon 1 synchro monster using materials, including this card you control. And if it's destroyed by battle or card effect, you can target 1 Crystron monster in your graveyard except for a synchro monster and special summon it. So being able to get resources back as well. But the fact that it can easily be summoned from the extra deck and not even have to synchro summon for it using our Link monster is another added plus as well. And I also run 2 Crystron Amatrix. We spoke of this card already. The level 5 synchro. If this card is synchro summoned, you can change all face-up special summon monsters your opponent controls to defense position. And if this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, you has the special summon of a Crystron monster, except a synchro, once again, from your graveyard. So you just have more and more resources to get back using this card also. And I have the one Crystron Phoenix to finish off the Synchro monsters. The one Synchro I didn't have is Crystron Yugioh, I believe is how you pronounce the name. The bigger boss monster for the deck, but I'll show what Synchro I would take out for that card as well. But with Phoenix, if this card is Synchro Summon, you can banish all spell and traps your opponent controls and in their graveyard. And if the Synchro Summon card is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can target one other monster in your opponent's graveyard and special summon it. At level 9, Crystron, when you get it out, you can pretty much, eliminate your opponent and any of the problem cards they may have had on the field that you were dealing with. But just the one of, though, it's a little more difficult to get out, just like Quarion Gandrix. So just when the situation pops up with Quarion Gandrix being able to banish the monsters and this one being able to banish the spell and traps, they both work very, very well together when you can summon them out. And for some of the more generic cards, if you want to try some synchros like Samurai Destroyer or some other generic machine ones, you can give them a try, but I still like running some of the generics like Black Rose Dragon, Cyber's Quantum Dragon, Trishula, and Mistworm. Mistworm or Trishula would probably be the one I would take out for Quarion Gandrix for that Crystron spot, depending on what the player wants to take out. I also run one Stardust Charge Warrior and one Ultimea Zulkin for the synchro plays you can do, especially with this being another negate on the field. And I also run for the Link monsters, the Crystron Halqifibrax. This is your go-to Link monster. It was made for this deck, but then, like I said, used in all the other decks more powerfully. But the intended deck, obviously, with this one being able to special summon a tuner from your deck or hand and defense on the field, negating its effects, but still that added tuner plus is especially useful in the deck. And also, you can banish this card you control to special summon one tuner synchro from your extra deck, and this is treated as a synchro summon. You can only use each effect of Halqifibrax once per turn, but it goes with all the plays for the Crystron deck, which is definitely useful for sure. And for the rest of the Link monsters, I run one Miss Starboy, once again going with all the water monsters, one Nightmare Phoenix, and one Nightmare Unicorn. If you want to add in a second Halqifibrax, if you have it, you can take out the one Nightmare Phoenix or the Unicorn, depending on, whichever play you prefer, destroying spell or traps or spinning your opponent's cards back into their deck. But one of the go-to plays, especially for all the setup you can do in the deck, is relying on the Quick Draw Synchron with your graveyard setup of your Crystron Thirstvin. Being able to discard the Thirstvern to special summon your Quick Draw Synchron, setting up the Thirstvern in the graveyard. You didn't use the destruction effect, so you can banish it to search for another Crystron card in your deck, whichever one you need for the play, especially, which you can either go for the Rosenix or the Smiger. Then from that play, you can normal summon it and then destroy the Quick Draw Synchron to summon out the tuner Crystron you prefer, whichever one it is. And then from there, you can go for the level 5 synchro play into your Amatrix, or even go for the Halqifibrax play by using the two of them, just needing the two monsters, one of them being a tuner. So whichever of the two you prefer for the play to go with. And then also having more of the graveyard setup, whichever one you summoned out onto the field. If you go for the Rosenix and the Citri, you can then summon out the basically the Halqifibrax and then summon another tuner onto the field for you to reuse. And then with the banish of Halqifibrax as well, being able to summon out your Quandax. And then being able to synchro summon on your opponent's turn with whatever setup you make as well is the viable play to go for in the deck also. But like I said, Halqifibrax definitely helps for the overall power in the deck, so you definitely want to run this when you have your Crystron deck made also. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Until next time, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.